"You'll sleep with me tonight," said the virgin woman hiding in his deserted ranch. The ranch had once been alive with the laughter of children and the lowing of cattle, but now it seemed like a place frozen in time. It was the kind of place people avoided, especially after dark, because rumors said strange things happened here. Jacob, a young man in his late 20s, had inherited the ranch from a distant relative he barely knew. He had not expected to come across it so soon, but a letter had arrived weeks ago telling him he was the new owner. Jacob was curious but also cautious. He had grown up in the city, surrounded by busy streets and noisy neighbors, so this quiet, empty land felt strange and a little intimidating. The first thing Jacob noticed as he arrived was the silence. It was not the peaceful kind of silence he was used to on quiet nights in the city. This silence was thick, almost heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The air smelled faintly of dry grass and old wood. Every step Jacob took made the dry dirt crunch beneath his boots. He carried a small bag with some clothes, a flashlight, and a notebook, planning to spend the night in the main house before exploring more in the morning. The house itself was old, with wooden boards that had faded to gray. Windows were dusty and some were cracked, letting in slivers of the fading sunlight. As Jacob stepped inside, he noticed the smell of old books and wood polish mixed with something faintly metallic. It reminded him of the kind of smell he sometimes found in old libraries. The floors groaned under his weight, and cobwebs hung from the corners like forgotten curtains. Jacob set down his bag and walked through the main hall. There were old paintings on the walls, portraits of people who had lived there long ago. Their eyes seemed to follow him as he moved, and he felt a shiver run down his spine. But he pushed the feeling aside. He had a plan. Tonight he would sleep here, and in the morning he would begin restoring the ranch. He explored the kitchen and found old dishes covered in dust, but they seemed mostly intact. A rusty kettle sat on the stove, and he imagined someone had used it long ago to make tea for visitors. The living room had a fireplace with a cracked mantel, and the furniture was mostly covered in white sheets. Jacob pulled one sheet off a chair to inspect it. The upholstery was faded, but otherwise it seemed sturdy. As the sun disappeared completely behind the hills, the house grew darker. Jacob turned on his flashlight, scanning the rooms carefully. That was when he first heard it, a soft, almost inaudible sound coming from upstairs. He froze, listening. It was like the faintest whisper, but he couldn't make out any words. His heart began to race, and he told himself it was just the wind or the house settling. Still, curiosity got the better of him. Jacob carefully climbed the wooden stairs, each step creaking loudly in the quiet. At the top, the hallway stretched before him, lined with doors that led to what must have once been bedrooms. One door at the far end was slightly ajar. A strange feeling tugged at him, a mixture of fear and anticipation. As he approached, he saw a shadow move inside the room. Jacob's pulse quickened. He called out softly, "Hello, is someone there?" The shadow did not respond. Slowly, he pushed the door open, and that was when he saw her. A young woman was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall. She looked frightened but calm at the same time. Her clothes were simple and clean, and her hair fell loosely over her shoulders. Jacob could not tell why she was there or how long she had been hiding. Before he could speak, she looked up at him with wide, fearful eyes. "You'll sleep with me tonight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob froze. The words were strange, and he could not understand what she meant. Then he realized she did not mean it in the way he first thought. She meant that he would share the same space. There was no other way, as the house had only one room that was safe for sleeping. Jacob nodded slowly. He wanted to ask questions, but he sensed that she had been through something difficult. Her eyes, though wary, held a deep sadness. It was clear she was alone, and she had been hiding for reasons he could only guess at. "Okay," he said carefully. "We can share the room, but you need to tell me why you're here." She had been living in the area for a while, hiding from people who wanted to harm her. The ranch, abandoned as it was, had become a refuge. She had no family left nearby and no one to help her. It was dangerous for her to go into the town, so she stayed hidden. Jacob listened intently. The more she spoke, the more he understood the difficulty she faced. He felt a strange mix of compassion and responsibility. This was not what he had expected when he came to claim his inheritance, but he knew he could not turn away. The house suddenly did not feel quite as empty anymore. The presence of this young woman changed the atmosphere. He helped her find a blanket from a nearby closet, and they arranged the floor near the fireplace to make a small, safe space for the night. The fire had long since gone out, but he gathered some old wood to restart it. The crackling of the flames filled the room with warmth, and the shadows danced on the walls. For the first time since arriving, Jacob felt a small measure of comfort. As they settled down, Jacob asked her name. She paused, then said, "Alina." It was a simple name, but it suited her. They did not speak much after that, only the occasional question about the weather or the ranch. The silence between them was not awkward. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the unusual situation they were in. Hours passed slowly. The wind outside rustled the trees, and the sound of distant animals echoed through the night. Jacob could not stop thinking about the mysteries of the ranch and the story of Alina. Who had she been running from? How had she survived all this time? His mind was filled with questions, but he also realized he could only take one step at a time. Finally, sleep came slowly. Jacob felt a strange sense of connection to the ranch and to Alina. This abandoned place, full of dust and shadows, had unexpectedly become a place of trust and safety for both of them. The night stretched on, and outside the moon rose high, casting a pale light over the land. Jacob dreamed of the ranch in its old days, full of life and laughter, and he imagined what it might become again. Alina dreamed too, though her dreams were tinged with fear and hope. Together, in the quiet of the deserted ranch, they faced the uncertainty of the night and the beginning of a story neither of them could have predicted. Morning was still far away, but the first part of their journey had already begun. The abandoned ranch, once a lonely place, now held the promise of something new. Jacob and Alina did not yet know how the days ahead would unfold, but they knew that they were no longer entirely alone. The first light of dawn seeped through the cracks in the wooden walls, casting thin golden lines across the floor. Jacob stirred slowly, blinking as he adjusted to the brightness. The room smelled faintly of wood smoke and old dust. Alina was already awake, sitting near the small pile of firewood, her hands clasped around her knees. She looked tired but alert, as if she had not slept properly in days, or maybe weeks. Jacob watched her quietly. There was a strength in the way she held herself, a quiet determination that made him curious. He wondered what kind of life she had led before finding herself alone in this abandoned ranch. His first thought was that he should try to make her feel safe, but he did not want to scare her by asking too many questions too soon. "Good morning," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. Alina glanced up, her eyes meeting his briefly before she nodded. "Morning," she replied. Her voice was calm, but there was a caution in it, a sense of someone who had learned to be careful with strangers. Jacob decided to start with practical things. "I'll make some breakfast. We can talk after that." He found a small kettle and some old coffee in the cupboard. The water took a long time to boil over the old stove, but the sound of it bubbling felt strangely comforting in the quiet house. Alina helped him clear a small area, moving a few chairs so they could sit together. As they ate, the silence stretched for a moment before Jacob tried again. "So, how long have you been living here?" he asked gently. Alina hesitated, tracing a finger over the wooden table. "A few months," she said finally. "Maybe more. I stopped keeping track. It's hard to count days when you're hiding." Her eyes flicked to the window as if she expected someone to appear there at any moment. Jacob nodded, understanding a little of her fear. He had never lived through something like that, but he knew that fear could take many forms. "You must be very careful," he said. "I want to help you, but I don't want anyone to get hurt." "Not now." The ranch was larger than Jacob had imagined. There were barns and stables, fences that had fallen in places, and an orchard with trees that had grown wild and untended. Birds chirped in the trees, and the occasional rustle of a small animal made them both pause. Alina moved quietly, almost blending into the shadows as they walked. Jacob noticed how alert she was, her eyes scanning the horizon constantly. "This place, it's beautiful," Jacob said, trying to sound cheerful. "It just needs some care." The ranch, though abandoned and weathered, had a life of its own. He imagined what it must have been like years ago, children running through the fields, animals grazing peacefully, the house full of warmth and laughter. And now, with Alina there, it felt like the ranch had a chance to breathe again. They reached the barn, its doors hanging crookedly on rusted hinges. Jacob pushed one open and dust swirled into the sunlight. Inside, he could see old farming tools, broken carts, and a few barrels that had survived the years. Alina stepped cautiously behind him, her footsteps silent. "I've stayed here before," she admitted, her voice low. "Sometimes in the barn, sometimes in the house. The animals scared me less than people did." It was clear that Alina had learned to survive by being quiet, by avoiding attention. He felt admiration for her courage, but also a desire to protect her. "You don't have to stay hidden anymore," he said softly. "We can make this place safe, together." She said nothing, but she allowed him to continue showing her around the property. By midday, they had explored most of the ranch. Jacob found a small garden plot, overgrown with weeds but still fertile. He imagined planting vegetables and flowers there, making the place livable again. Alina watched him quietly, her expression softening slightly. When they returned to the house, the sun was high, and the heat made the wooden floors feel warm underfoot. Jacob suggested they rest for a while. Alina sat near the window, her gaze distant, while Jacob checked the old locks on the doors. He wanted to make sure no one could enter without notice. The ranch, while isolated, was not completely secure. Hours passed slowly. The afternoon light shifted, painting the walls in shades of gold and orange. Jacob noticed Alina seemed more relaxed, though still cautious. She began to speak a little about herself, telling him small details about her life, where she grew up, how she learned to take care of herself, and the little joys she found in reading and observing nature. Jacob listened, fascinated. The more he learned about her, the more he realized how much strength it took to live alone in such a place. He felt a mix of admiration and concern. He wanted to help her feel safe, to make this ranch a real home for her, but he knew that trust would take time. As evening approached, a strange sound broke the quiet, a faint creaking, like someone walking near the edge of the property. Both Jacob and Alina froze. Alina's eyes widened, and Jacob instinctively moved closer to her. They waited, listening intently. The sound faded, and they realized it was probably an animal. Still, the moment reminded them that the ranch, while peaceful, was also unpredictable. Jacob suggested they start preparing dinner. He found some old canned food in the pantry and boiled water for tea. Alina helped, her movements careful but efficient. It was the first time they had worked together in a shared task, and it felt like a small step toward a sense of normalcy. As night fell, they sat by the fire again. The flames cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, and the wind whispered through the broken windows. Jacob noticed that Alina seemed quieter tonight, lost in thought. He decided to give her space, sensing that she needed time to adjust to having someone else in her life. "Tomorrow," Jacob said gently, breaking the silence, "we can start fixing up the garden. Maybe clean the barn a little. There's a lot we can do here." There was a small, hopeful smile on her face, a rare glimpse of the person she might have been before the fear took hold. The night deepened, and the fire burned low. They arranged blankets on the floor again, close enough to feel safe but not crowded. Sleep came more easily this time, though both of them remained partially alert, the events of the day and the quiet of the ranch keeping them aware of their surroundings. Jacob dreamed of rebuilding the ranch, imagining it full of life once more. Alina dreamed too, though her dreams were cautious, filled with shadows and the sense of being watched. Yet there was a flicker of hope, a feeling that things might be different now, that she was not entirely alone. Outside, the moon rose high, casting silver light over the land. The ranch seemed to hold its breath again, as if waiting for the next chapter of the story to unfold. Jacob and Alina had taken the first steps toward trust and cooperation, but the mysteries of the ranch and the dangers of the world beyond its boundaries were far from over. In the quiet of the night, they both understood one thing: the deserted ranch was no longer empty. It held the possibility of friendship, safety, and perhaps even a new beginning. But it would require courage, patience, and trust, and that was something both of them would need to build slowly together. The morning light was soft and golden, spilling through the broken windows of the old ranch house. Jacob woke first, stretching and listening to the quiet hum of the countryside. Birds chirped outside, and the distant hills glowed faintly in the sun's first rays. He glanced at Alina, who was still asleep, her head resting lightly on a folded blanket. There was a calmness in the room, a fragile sense of peace that Jacob knew might not last, but he wanted to enjoy it while it was there. He quietly rose and decided to start the day by checking the outer fences and the barn. Over the last 2 days, he had realized how much work the ranch needed. Weeds had overrun the garden plot, some of the fences had collapsed entirely, and the barn was falling apart in places. It was a daunting task, but Jacob felt determined. As he walked outside, he inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the fresh morning air. It smelled of dry grass, soil, and the faint tang of metal from the old tools scattered around the property. Alina soon joined him, carrying a small basket with some leftover bread and fruits they had found in the pantry. She walked carefully over the uneven ground, her eyes scanning the horizon as she moved. Jacob noticed how alert she was. Every bird, every small rustle in the bushes seemed to catch her attention. It was clear that living alone in this place for so long had made her cautious, but also highly aware of her surroundings. "I'll help you fix the fences," she said softly, setting the basket down near the barn. There was a hint of determination in her voice, a sense that she wanted to contribute and be part of the work. Jacob smiled. "That would be great," he said. "There's a lot to do, but we'll take it one step at a time." As they worked, they talked quietly about simple things: the weather, the types of plants in the garden, and small memories from their pasts. Alina seemed to relax as they worked. Her laughter, soft and rare, occasionally broke the quiet of the morning, and Jacob realized how much he had missed hearing it. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, a mix of friendship, compassion, and something he could not yet name. The ranch, which had felt so empty and foreboding when he first arrived, now seemed alive with possibility. After a few hours, they paused for a break. Jacob brought water from the old well, and they sat in the shade of a tree, drinking and wiping sweat from their faces. Alina looked around at the property, her eyes lingering on the garden plot and the barn. "It could be beautiful again," she said quietly, "if someone cared for it like you're trying to." There was a quiet pride in her voice, and Jacob realized that she was beginning to trust him, even if only a little. The afternoon brought new challenges. While inspecting the barn, they noticed a small group of animals, rabbits and birds, had made nests inside. Some of the wooden beams had weakened over the years, making it dangerous to move too quickly. Jacob and Alina worked together to carefully remove debris and secure the structure. Each movement required focus and caution, and they learned to communicate without words at times, understanding each other's intentions with gestures and glances. As the sun began to lower in the sky, painting the landscape in shades of orange and pink, Jacob realized that this day had been one of the most productive since he arrived. The garden plot was cleared of weeds, the fences were partially repaired, and the barn was safer to enter. Alina seemed more comfortable, her shoulders less tense, and her eyes held a hint of hope. They returned to the house, tired but satisfied. Jacob suggested they make a simple dinner with the remaining canned food and some bread. Alina helped gather firewood, and soon the small fire in the fireplace crackled warmly. The aroma of the simple meal filled the room, and for a moment, the house felt like a home rather than a silent, abandoned structure. After eating, they sat near the fire, the warmth of the flames casting flickering shadows on the walls. Jacob decided to ask Alina more about herself, sensing that the evening might be a good time for her to open up. "You've been here a long time alone," he said gently. "It must have been hard." Sometimes the silence was comforting, but other times it was frightening. You start imagining things, people in the shadows, noises that aren't really there. I learned to stay quiet, to move slowly, and to trust no one. I don't know if I could have done the same. The wind outside rustled through the trees, and the occasional howl of a distant animal reminded them that the world beyond the ranch was still wild and unpredictable. Yet inside the house, there was a quiet sense of safety, of two people sharing a space and slowly building trust. As night deepened, Jacob suggested they prepare for sleep. He gathered blankets and arranged the small sleeping area near the fireplace. Alina seemed hesitant at first, but then she moved closer, laying down and tucking the blanket around her. Jacob did the same, and for the first time in days, Alina seemed to relax completely. Before drifting off, Jacob thought about the future. The ranch held so many possibilities, but also so many unknowns. There were repairs to be made, and he knew that living in such an isolated place could bring unexpected challenges. But for now, there was a sense of hope, a feeling that they were no longer completely alone in the world. The night passed quietly. Jacob dreamed of the ranch in its old days, full of life, laughter, and activity. He imagined the barn filled with animals again, the garden lush with vegetables and flowers, and the house warm and welcoming. Alina dreamed too, but her dreams were cautious, reflecting both fear and hope. She imagined herself walking freely in the fields, no longer hiding, and feeling the warmth of companionship rather than solitude. Morning came slowly, bringing a soft light that filtered through the dusty windows. Jacob woke first, as usual, and looked around. Alina was still asleep, her breathing steady and calm. He smiled quietly, realizing that the bond between them had grown, even in just a few days. There was trust now, fragile but real, and it gave him a sense of purpose he had not felt before. After breakfast, they decided to continue working on the property. They focused on smaller tasks that could be accomplished quickly, repairing a broken door, clearing debris from the pathways, and organizing the tools in the barn. Each task brought a sense of accomplishment, and slowly the ranch began to feel less like an abandoned place and more like a home. By midday, they paused to rest under the shade of a large tree near the garden plot. Alina picked up a small stone and traced patterns in the dirt absent-mindedly. "Do you think this place can really be fixed?" she asked quietly. Jacob looked at the property, imagining the possibilities. "Yes," he said firmly. "It will take time, but I believe it can. And I think you can help make it beautiful again." Jacob suggested they prepare dinner again, and Alina agreed, her movements more relaxed than the day before. The fire crackled warmly in the fireplace, and the small house felt alive with activity once more. That night, as they settled down to sleep, Jacob reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. The ranch was no longer just a quiet, abandoned place. It had become a space of trust, of shared effort, and of growing friendship. Alina had begun to open up, and he felt a sense of responsibility to protect her, to help her feel safe, and to build a life together in this lonely but promising place. Outside, the moon rose high, casting a silver light over the ranch. The night was quiet, but it no longer felt threatening. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a sense of possibility and the promise of a new beginning. Jacob and Alina had faced the challenges of the day together, and in doing so, they had taken another step toward turning the abandoned ranch into a home. The morning air was cool and fresh as Jacob woke to the soft light filtering through the broken windows. He took a deep breath, savoring the calm of the early hours. For the first time, the ranch felt less like an abandoned place and more like a space of possibility. Alina was already awake, quietly sweeping the small kitchen floor. Her movements were careful, deliberate, but there was a calmness in her expression that Jacob had not seen before. He smiled at her. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," she replied, returning the smile. It was small but genuine, a sign of growing comfort. Jacob realized that in the short time they had spent together, a quiet trust had developed between them. It was fragile, yes, but real. He felt a sense of satisfaction and purpose that he had not expected when he first arrived at the ranch. Breakfast was simple: bread, some fruit, and water. But it was shared, and the act of preparing it together had become a comforting routine. They spoke softly, exchanging thoughts about the work they wanted to do that day. Jacob suggested finishing the garden, repairing the remaining fences, and cleaning out the barn completely. Alina agreed, and for the first time she spoke with a quiet determination that made Jacob hopeful. As they stepped outside, the ranch seemed brighter in the morning sun. Birds chirped in the trees, and the distant hills glowed with warmth. Jacob noticed Alina moving with more confidence than before. Her eyes no longer darted nervously at every sound. She seemed more at ease, as if the presence of another person had brought her some sense of safety. They began with the garden, removing stubborn weeds and digging small holes to plant seeds for vegetables and flowers. Alina worked alongside Jacob, her hands moving skillfully as if she had done this work before. They talked quietly as they worked, sharing stories of their childhoods, small memories, and dreams for the future. Each story revealed more about who they were, their fears, and their hopes. Jacob realized that the ranch had become more than a place to live. It was a canvas on which they could build a new life. The tasks they performed together were not just physical labor. They were acts of trust, cooperation, and connection. Each nail hammered into a fence post, each seed planted in the soil, was a small step toward something greater than themselves. By midday, the garden was beginning to take shape. The soil was cleared, neat rows were marked, and the first seeds were planted. Alina stood back, wiping her brow with the back of her hand, and smiled. "It looks promising," she said softly. Jacob nodded. "Yes, it does, and it's just the beginning." Alina seemed more confident than before, climbing over low beams and moving carefully but with purpose. Jacob admired her courage and determination, realizing how much she had endured to survive on her own. While working, they noticed some signs that small animals had taken shelter inside, birds nesting in corners and a few rabbits hiding in the shadows. Instead of scaring them away, Jacob suggested they leave the animals alone, respecting the life that had quietly existed alongside them. Alina agreed, and together they carefully worked around the animals, creating a balance between restoring the barn and respecting the creatures that called it home. As the afternoon sun began to lower, they took a break under the shade of a large tree near the garden. The air was warm but gentle, and the quiet of the ranch felt comforting. Jacob pulled out the notebook he had brought when he first arrived, sketching a rough plan of the property, where the garden could expand, where the barn could be further improved, and ideas for repairing the house. Alina watched him, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You're really serious about this place," she said quietly. "I am," Jacob replied. "It may look abandoned, but it has so much potential, and now it feels alive, especially because you're here. I've been alone for so long. I forgot what it felt like to feel part of something." They shared a moment of understanding, a silent acknowledgement that the ranch was no longer just a place of survival, but a place of hope. As the evening approached, they returned to the house to prepare dinner. Jacob found some old canned vegetables and mixed them with fresh herbs from the small garden, while Alina set the table. The process felt natural now, a routine they had begun to establish. They laughed softly at small mishaps, like spilling a little water or burning the bread slightly, and the house echoed with a warmth it had not known for years. After dinner, they sat near the fireplace, the flames casting gentle shadows across the walls. Jacob spoke about future plans for the ranch, the possibility of planting more gardens, fixing the roof, and even welcoming visitors someday. Alina listened quietly, her expression thoughtful but brightening as she imagined the possibilities. "I never thought I would see this place like this," she said finally. "I thought it would always be abandoned, empty, and lonely. It doesn't have to be, not anymore. We can build something new here together." As they drifted to sleep, their minds were filled with hope. The ranch, once a place of shadows and silence, now held light and life. The work they had done together was more than physical. It was the building of trust, the creation of a safe space, and the beginning of a new chapter. Morning arrived gently, bringing a clear sky and the soft warmth of sunlight. Jacob and Alina woke feeling refreshed and ready to continue their work. Today, they would plant more seeds, reinforce the remaining fences, and perhaps explore a small area of the property they had not yet visited. As they worked side by side, there was a quiet rhythm to their movements. Jacob would pass tools to Alina, and she would hand him nails or wood. Their communication was simple, gestures, glances, and small words, but it was effective. Together, they moved with purpose, each task reinforcing the sense of partnership that had grown between them. By midday, the garden was flourishing with small sprouts emerging from the soil. The barn was safer and more organized, and the fences were sturdy. The ranch was beginning to feel like a home, a place where life could grow and where trust could flourish. Alina's laughter had returned, soft and warm, and Jacob found himself smiling more often, filled with a quiet contentment he had not known in years. As the afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon, they paused to admire their work. The ranch no longer felt abandoned. The garden, the barn, and the house all carried signs of care and attention. But more importantly, the ranch now held the presence of two people working together, supporting each other and building a life from the ground up. Alina turned to Jacob, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the sunset. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. For helping me, and for helping this place feel alive again." The stars appeared one by one, twinkling in the clear night sky. For the first time, the ranch felt complete, not because the work was finished, but because the people there had created a sense of home, safety, and companionship. As they lay down to sleep, the fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow over the blankets. There was no fear now, only peace. The past, with its loneliness and uncertainty, felt distant. The future was full of possibilities, waiting to be shaped by their courage, trust, and care. Jacob and Alina drifted into sleep, their hearts light and their spirits lifted. Outside, the ranch seemed to breathe with them, alive once more, a place where life, hope, and trust could grow. The story that had begun with fear and isolation had transformed into one of friendship, resilience, and the quiet beauty of a new beginning. The deserted ranch was no longer deserted. It was a home, a refuge, and a promise of life renewed. And in the quiet of the night, under the watchful stars, Jacob and Alina knew that together, they could face whatever the future might bring.